In Deuteronomy 25, verse 5, levirate marriage is spoken of. It says, if brothers dwell together, and one of them dies, and he has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her, and take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. Up to this point, all the episodes I've spoken of have been defending the idea that biblical polygamous marriage is allowed. It is not sinful, which is a very modest stance to be taking. I'm not proposing or encouraging people to enter into polygamy. I am merely saying it is allowed if exercised biblically. But today, it is possible for you to be in such a circumstance in ancient Israel, according to Deuteronomy 25, where polygamy not only is allowed, but it's commanded. If you're in the circumstance where you have a brother who dies and you are already married and he leaves a surviving wife, levirate marriage laws dictate you to take on a second wife. Okay? Now, the question of how does levirate marriage in ancient Israel apply to the modern day church? Because it's intrinsically tied to not blotting out the man's name from Israel. And what is that in today's modern day world church? That's another matter. That's another discussion to be had. But what I'm trying to communicate is the principle that polygamy is so not evil that it was even commanded at one point. And if the law is a reflection of God's character, for him to command it is all the more proof that it cannot be evil in principle. Okay? So I've talked to a pastor, and I've heard other pastors agree that this levirate marriage law is a case where polygamy is allowed, where polygamy is commanded. Okay? But the pastor I spoke to and others committed the sin, I think it's a sin, to shirk off the Old Testament law and be like, yeah, that doesn't apply anymore. And they somehow think in their minds that God changes his rules and laws and his own character in reflecting what that character is in the modern day compared to the old day. They think God changed his mind, or they think the law has changed. It's not everlasting. It's not right. And they think this is just yet one more example of God caving in on his own holiness in order to appease men, which I've addressed in the first episode, and I think is a heinous sin to be saying. But the point is, the pastors at least will agree that the Bible here is teaching polygamy not only is allowed, but is commanded. There is one particular YouTuber I'm thinking of, a popular Christian man who I believe is a sincere Christian, who argues that Deuteronomy 25 is not promoting polygamy because of a certain verse that he extrapolates too much that is not even there. I believe he's committing eisegesis. So in Deuteronomy 25, verse 5 says, if brothers dwell together. Now, this particular man believes that the words, if brothers dwell together, is proof that the brother who's surviving the deceased brother is single and had to be single. And if that was the case, polygamy was never commanded, according to the levirate marriage laws here. Now, how does he get that one of the brothers is single? I don't know. He makes it up. That's what it is, because there's nothing in verse 5 that says the brothers are single. But he says, if brothers dwell together, is indicative of the fact that one of the brothers was too young, he was still living at home, or living with his brother, and he didn't have his own wife or his family. And because of that, the brother who was married, if he dies, it would be okay for the surviving brother to be married to the surviving widow, because the brothers lived together, indicating the surviving brother was single and without a family. Now, it doesn't take a genius to realize that none of that is in verse 5 at all. That's all made up. But you want to talk about, like, pulling, a tenuous reasoning, pulling stuff from the Bible that isn't there in order to save your own moral, social standards from being attacked by the Bible. That's what he's doing right there. But I can give you an example from the Bible that proves that such a case is a lie. Leviticus 25 proves that brothers dwelled together while they were both married with their own families. Leviticus 25, verse 40. Let's start at verse 39. If your brother becomes poor beside you, and he sells himself to you, he shall not make him serve as a slave. You shall not make him serve as a slave. He shall be with you as a hired worker and as a sojourner. He shall serve with you until your year of Jubilee. Then he shall go out from you, he and his children with him, and go back to his own clan, or back to his own family, and return to the possession of his fathers. So verse 39 of Leviticus 25 says, if your brother becomes poor beside you, and then shows in verse 41 that he already had children, he already had a family to go back to, or to return with him to the land of his fathers. Okay, so Leviticus 25 proves that brothers did live together, even with their own families, even with their own wives, their families, their children. Okay, there was nothing about brothers living together that dictated that they couldn't have their own wives or families. Leviticus 25 proves that. So this YouTuber, trying hard as he may to demand that levirate marriage in Deuteronomy 25 dictated brothers living together meant that one of them was at least unmarried, is just false. It's false. It's special pleading. It's making stuff up and putting things in the Bible that aren't there in order to protect your own socially determined moral compass, as opposed to having the Bible be your moral compass. But I'm going to go further than that, and I want to use an example, as I like to do. I like to read the laws of the Bible, the didactic portions of Scripture, and then I like to look at examples in the Bible of those portions of Scripture, those didactic portions, the law, the teachings, lived out in historical narrative stories of the Bible. An levirate marriage law being lived out in the Bible is found in the book of Ruth. And I want to show in the book of Ruth how polygamy is intrinsically tied to the levirate marriage law. In Ruth, you know the story, Boaz is going to take the hand of Ruth in marriage. But Boaz knows the levirate marriage laws and the kinsman redeemer laws that I just read to you. And there was one closer in kin to Ruth than Boaz, who has a right to her before Boaz does. And so he has to go before this kinsman and ask his permission to go before him. When Boaz does this, he brings the elders of the city to the gate to discuss the matter. So Boaz, in wanting to fulfill the law, the levirate marriage laws, goes to this kinsman in order to see if the kinsman will take Ruth's hand in marriage and her inheritance property first. And if the kinsman will not, Boaz gets the right to take her. So he confronts the kinsman, and he says to him, to the Redeemer, he says, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know. For there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. So Boaz confronts this kinsman before the elders at the gate of the town, the elders and the people, to tell him, hey, the parcel of land is yours to take. If you will not take it, I'm next in line. So the Redeemer says, I will redeem it. The Redeemer wants the land. Then Boaz says again, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. So here, the Redeemer is all the more willing to take the land that's the inheritance of the dead, because he's the closest Redeemer. And as soon as he says, I will redeem it, Boaz comes at it again and says, if you take the land, you also have to take the surviving widow, Ruth. She comes with the land as per the levirate marriage law, and you have to take her as well. The Redeemer then responds, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. And then the rest of the story goes that Boaz rejoices with Ruth taking her hand in marriage, and everyone celebrates. But I want to talk about how this kinsman redeemer, whose name is left out, ironically, from the historical narrative here, is first willing to fulfill the marriage law or to fulfill the levirate laws when it comes to taking on the properties. But when it comes to taking on the wife, that's when he backs out. Now, why does he back out? He gives a reason. The reason he gives is, lest I impair my own inheritance. Now, what does that mean? His own inheritance. Is he talking about the inheritance that he himself is receiving from his fathers? Well, no, that can't be, because how would him taking on the property hurt his right from his own fathers? No, that's not what he's talking about, because that wouldn't hurt the right that his fathers have to give to their children. And it's his inheritance anyway. And if it was the inheritance he would be receiving from his parents, that still didn't stop him from wanting to take on the property prior to knowing that Ruth was part of the deal. So that didn't slow him down. So it can't be the inheritance he was going to receive from his fathers. That's not it. So what inheritance is he talking about? Well, he must be talking about the inheritance that he has to give to his own children. That's what he has to be talking about. And if it was just the property, he was all the more willing to take it on, because it would add to his ability to give more property, more inheritance to his own children. But as soon as Ruth becomes part of the deal, he backs out, because that would ruin his ability to hand out his inheritance. Why would that ruin his ability to hand out his inheritance? Well, because if he took on Ruth and perpetuated her name, he would have more children. And having more children means he would have to disperse the inheritance away from his already begotten children to the new children he was supposed to perpetuate, to generate. So that's the only way that this objection makes sense. The only way the objection makes sense is to understand that the kinsman redeemer already had a family, already had children to give an inheritance to. And the reason he rejects Ruth is because he doesn't want that inheritance to be ruined. Keep in mind, the entire elder council and Boaz and the entire community recognize that even though this kinsman redeemer already has a family, he still has first dibs at taking on this second wife to perpetuate her name, her children, to take on this widow, to fulfill the marriage laws. So this is just lived out proof that the levirate marriage laws didn't care if the surviving brother was married or had a family or not. Meaning, in some circumstances, to fulfill God's laws, God commanded polygamy. Okay? Now, the kinsman redeemer ended up turning down the opportunity to marry Ruth, which was okay only because Boaz was next in line and he wanted to marry Ruth. And the town celebrated because of it. But I just wanted to show that the elders, the town, the community, and Boaz himself recognized that he had the right to marry her first, to take her on in his polygamy before Boaz did. And while I'm in Ruth, I just want to point out one more verse. As the elders are celebrating, they say to Ruth in verse 11 of chapter 4, "Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, 'We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman,'" that is, Ruth, "'who is coming into your house, like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel.'" Here the elders are pronouncing a blessing on the marriage of Boaz and Ruth, saying, "May that blessing give to you children the way God gave children to Rachel and Leah." And in their parenthetical comment, they say, "who together built up the house of Israel." I think this is a clear connection. That word together, where they say Rachel and Leah together built up the house of Israel, intrinsically ties the blessing that they're pronouncing on Boaz and Ruth to the blessing that polygamy gave to Jacob. Rachel and Leah, who together blessed the house of Israel. So this is another explicit comment. The elders of the town in Ruth chapter 4 are saying that polygamy specifically, because they say Rachel and Leah together, polygamy resulted in blessings on the house of Israel. So that was a lot today. We went over a didactic portion of Scripture on levirate marriage law, showing that it was had to be fulfilled, was commanded regardless of the marriage status of the surviving brother, as per Leviticus 25. And then we looked at Ruth chapter 4 for an example of this being lived out, where the kinsman redeemer was already married, already had a family, and still was obligated by levirate marriage law to have a right to redeem the surviving brother's wife. And it was okay that he didn't, only because Boaz was next in line, who was all the more willing to take her on. And in the midst of even that, the elders blessed Boaz's marriage to her, using the blessings of a polygamous marriage on Jacob's marriage, and wanting to pronounce the resultant blessings of such a polygamous marriage onto the house of Boaz. Levirate marriage law is one of the strongest cases for recognizing polygamy to be not only not sinful, but in some cases commanded.